I've represented firefighters for well over 15 years. One of the agendas that firefighters have encountered over the years has been their cancer and what they're exposed to while they're undertaking their firefighting duties. A heap of research came out of overseas studies, probably I think around about 2006 we really started to become aware of it within our industry, and we started to lobby the government at that point in time for some research and for some data collection so that we could get proper statistics, so that we could know whether or not it was an issue and something that needed to be looked into further. At that point in time the government was really reluctant to start collecting that data. The international research has just continued to support the fact that firefighters, after a certain period of time working in that line of work, are exposed to carcinogenic substances and do get cancer as a result of that, to the point now where it's really indisputable. At this point for Queensland, essentially it's just a promise to legislate. The government hasn't actually put anything through Cabinet as far as we're aware, or through the normal legislative process, which is debating it and introducing it into Parliament and then passing the legislation. It is actually legislated in the federal jurisdiction, and also Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania. Northern Territory have got it at the bill stage in Parliament, but Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria haven't really advanced that far. Usually what will happen is that there will be some community involvement and opportunity for people to put forward submissions that have an interest. So stakeholders can put information forward and their point of view in relation to that. That's now coming back into the Queensland process because with our former government, the consultative period was really quite condensed, so it didn't give people a good opportunity to put that forward. Having said that, the previous government did also make an election promise to legislate for this. So what we do is we have that consultative process. The department that's in charge of that piece of legislation goes through a policy development program as well within their department. They then put that to Cabinet. Cabinet then decides when they're going to introduce that into Parliament. It goes through a bill process, so the bill's introduced, it goes through some parliamentary debate, they work out some finer details as to what they want with that legislation, and eventually it's passed. The key points to the legislation when it finally is introduced is that a firefighter with a certain number of years of service, and that can be 5, 10, 15 years of service. If they are diagnosed with a particular type of cancer, it means that there's an automatic presumption that it is because of their firefighting duties. And it just means that for workers' compensation benefits, they don't have to have the type of fight that they are currently having in getting those claims through and accepted as a workers' compensation claim. Having said that though, you don't need the legislation to have your claims accepted. It just streamlines that process and makes it easier and less stressful. And you've got to remember, these are firefighters who have put their lives at risk on a very regular basis throughout their career. Now their lives are in jeopardy, and some of our clients are terminally ill from their cancer. To have a legal fight to get that entitlement and to be looked after properly, that's really stressful as well. So it's better for them to give them a good chance of recovery and fighting the disease to not have to have that fight. They still need to go through workers' compensation, which is Work Cover Queensland for Queensland firefighters, but the process that they need to go through is a lot more streamlined. So what we have at the moment with any firefighter is that they need to still prove that their employment was a significant contributing factor to the disease that they have, and because the cancer is an accumulative cause, it means that we have to go back through sometimes 15, 20, 25 years of firefighting history, count the number of fires they've attended, the number of minutes that they attended at each fire, and the periods of time that they were, or the periods of time that they were at certain fires and compare that with the type of equipment that they were wearing, and that can be a really lengthy process. It's not uncommon at the moment for it to take somewhere between 9 to 12 months to get through because of the information that's required, whereas if the legislation were passed, it can be in the normal time frames, which is 20 business days for a decision to be made, subject to the employer having problems with the application. If it's a terminal cancer and the doctors are saying that it is terminal, then they fall under the category of fatal injury benefits. So depending on their age, depending on the number of dependents, it can be somewhere upwards of $700,000 plus. If it is a cancer that is caught early and treatment is a positive, it has a positive outcome, then it may just be the medical expenses and the wages lost while they're off work having surgery or chemotherapy, things like that. And then if they've had to lose body parts, then there might be some additional compensation for that. Any dependent in Queensland where the worker has died because of their employment is entitled to that same sort of compensation, so that fatal injury benefit compensation. The difference is that if the firefighter is still alive while their application is being determined, that money will be paid before they die. If they die and then the application is made, then it would go to the dependents. The earlier research from the 1980s, probably up until the early 2000s, the stronger indicators that were coming out of that research identified patterns and significant numbers over the normal population for certain types of cancer, and that's the way that the legislation has developed. The newer research that's coming out now is actually identifying more cancers than that, including lung cancer, provided that the firefighter isn't a smoker, and also other cancers such as throat. What it's also identifying now is other nervous system diseases that aren't necessarily cancer but are still debilitating and can still be terminal as well. So as science gets better at identifying, as more data becomes available, more cancers are being identified. The Monash study, which was the Australia's biggest research, that was released in December of 2014, that actually made a prediction for an increase for some types of cancers, upwards of 40% increase in diagnosis of firefighters over the next 5 years. In some of the other jurisdictions, they have made retrospective legislation. In Northern Territory, they've promised it up to the date that that particular government came into power. So we don't know what Queensland are going to do. If it is retrospective, it may or may not help some of the firefighters that are currently going through the workers' compensation system. It really depends then on the period of time that they put it in. Queensland Fire and Emergency Service will be funding the claims out of their own budget, so it won't have an impact upon the overall workers' compensation scheme, which is something that's important for employers who have to pay their premiums. But it's all going to be funded by the department, according to the Minister. I think it's a long time coming. I think that the information has been there for a really long time, and I think that out of respect for those heroes in our community, that they ought to be looked after properly, and this is one step towards doing that. Anything less is not going to encourage people to join the fire service, because the risks of them getting cancer are quite high. The equipment that they use can never adequately protect them, so you need to look after them.